Hello, my name is Kayla Tillman, and this will be my presentation on sexual violence in reference to the movie Monster and how sexual violence can actually lead to the creation of a serial killer. Alright, Monster, the 2003 film, was based on the life and crimes of serial killer Aileen Wuornos, who was apprehended in Florida from the years 1989 to 1990. She murdered 7 men who were Johns while she was prostituting. She was exposed to sexual violence throughout the course of her lifetime, including incest in early childhood, sexual abuse by close family friends, and sexual abuse within the field of sex working. All of these things culminated to the psychosis that eventually led to her murder spree. Sexual violence was the foundation on which her mind was built, in which her mind was hardwired, in which she fought. Sexual violence with the plot. Wuornos was sexually abused from a very young age. As early as 5 years old, she was abandoned by both of her parents to live with her grandfather, who she reported abused her and molested her, as well as her brother. Due to this sexual deviation that she was taught and not having clear lines of sexual conduct, she became hypersexual and would even trade sexual favors, like showing her boobs to boys and stuff for cigarettes and money in school. So from a very young age, she learned that she could receive things by using her body. At the age of 14, she was raped by one of her grandfather's friends, and she became pregnant. She gave birth to the child and was immediately given up for adoption. Due to this, her grandfather actually ended up kicking her out, which led to her becoming a prostitute at the age of 15 in order to survive. Prostitution is a very high-risk behavior, and with the high-risk behavior comes very dangerous circumstances that prostitutes can find themselves in. And this is exactly what happened to Wuornos. She was brutally raped and beaten by a John, and fearing for her own life, pulled a gun and killed him in self-defense. Although she would claim that all of her murders were self-defense, this is the one with the most definitive evidence. The man who she killed first was actually a convicted rapist. He had a record of having done this kind of behavior, and she said that she reacted completely out of self-defense with this first murder, but then would hold that all of her murders were self-defense because all of her Johns tried to harm her or kill her in some way. In the movie, due to this altercation with this man, she becomes traumatized, and I would too, who would want to continue something hovering around a profession that you almost died. You came in contact with a psychotic individual. I wouldn't want to be in that type of situation any longer either. But you will find that only being a prostitute from the age of 15, she did not have a lot of job experience, a lot of references. It's very hard to go from a non-legitimate form of work to trying to join the workforce. Due to this, she had a very hard time trying to find an actual job. At this time, she was also trying to nurture a relationship with her girlfriend Selby, who was crippled at the time and could not work. So with this pressure, she felt pressured to provide for both of them, and her only means of work would be prostitution because she could not find legitimate work, although she did try. Due to the necessity that they needed for money, they needed cars to move around. They had dreams of moving to Florida and starting a life. Due to this necessity, she had to continue prostituting. But due to the PTSD from the incident with the man that she murdered, this all led to her continuing to murder her Johns. We're going to see how sexual violence affected the characters. Eileen, most obviously, sexual violence led to a life of prostitution at an early age. Being sexually abused as a child can lead to wanting to run away or homelessness, and these types of things will put children more at risk for becoming prostitutes as a means to survive. Sexual violence in her later life with the man that almost murdered her started her murder spree, and in her defense, all of these men tried to kill or hurt her in some way. Now, when we're talking about Selby and how sexual violence affected her character, she was drawn to Eileen due to Eileen's protective nature, and Eileen gained this protective nature through years of being abused and having to be strong and rise above it. She was never deterred. Although she dealt with all of this negativity and did not have a very good shake in life, she tried to have dreams and she tried to have a life. And all of these experiences only made her harder and stronger. And Selby, being a more, I guess, submissive type, was drawn to the protective nature of Wuornos. But due to the unfortunate circumstances of murder, she was dragged into the spree and ultimately had to testify against her lover in order to save herself. One of the other characters, multiple characters in this whole story, were the victims. Unfortunately, a history of sexual abuse led to the psychosis that would lead to the murder spree from Eileen. So although these men were all soliciting a prostitute, they simply were in the wrong place at the wrong time. I do not think that every single one did something worthy of being murdered, but contributing to the whole sex work thing, you were just as at risk, because prostitutes rob men, kill men all the time. They were simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. Accuracy of portrayal. In my opinion, in reference to the early sexual abuse and the ways that it can affect how you are later in life, I think that the movie had a very accurate portrayal. The early sexual abuse at the hands of her grandfather led to blurred lines of sexual conduct. This, in my opinion, was most relatable to when we watched the documentary Pedo Park. There was a woman on there, I believe her name was Tracy, and she was molested by her father as early as age 3, and they developed an unhealthy relationship where she actually thought that this abuse was a form of love and was something that was okay. And these blurred lines of sexual conduct can lead to hypersexuality, can lead to being a prostitute, and can lead to further trauma and psychosis due to untreated mental problems that come with being molested as a child. The second, being kicked out at 15, she became homeless. We see a lot of children that are runaways or homeless being snatched up into prostitution as a means to survive. Anger and violence are often things that will come due to untreated trauma. What wasn't really mentioned in this movie is that Eileen Wuornos had also been arrested for things like threatening a bartender with a beer bottle, or even throwing what is it called, the pool cue ball at a bartender's head. She had also been charged with armed robbery. She had a history of anger and violence, which were all due to her untreated early sexual abuse. Violent rape that she experienced. The accuracy of this. Fighting for one's life is traumatic, and although she may have killed in self-defense, there's not something that just leaves you. This is a fight or flight, an arousal in your body that can be revisited should, like, even the tiniest thing trigger it. just talking to a man, like being almost murdered by somebody who was soliciting you for sex, and then continuing to expose yourself to men who are expecting the same thing of you, can trigger unwanted feelings associated with the man that tried to kill you. And without therapy and help for this incident, her trauma worsened and her mind deteriorated. And she started to see her prostitution as a tool to murder and get what she needed, because she did not value these people as she felt they did not value her. Bystander intervention. The police, number one, in the movie, right following the first murder, while Eileen is trying to find legitimate work, we see a police officer pull her over for disturbing the peace. What he actually wanted was sexual favors in exchange for not arresting her. We probably see this actually happen a lot in reality, like corrupt cops and any other hire using sex workers for free in order for not like prosecuting them. And this was no different. But had this cop actually apprehended her, 6 men could have possibly survived. She'd been arrested after the first one. The other person who could have done something in this film was her partner, Selby. When Wuornos confessed to her that she had killed a man in self-defense, Selby never said, report this. She never said, this is wrong. She further justified in Wuornos' ill mind that murdering somebody who does you wrong is okay. Had she said, this is self-defense, we need to report this, we need to tell somebody, we can fight this, this was self-defense, that would have been a healthier option. But she was scared. Wuornos was scared, and so they chose to go on the run. She also is a bystander, in my opinion, because she kept pressuring Wuornos to continue prostitution. She saw the trauma that it caused her. She knew that she'd almost been murdered being a prostitute, and yet she pressured her into being a prostitute in order to provide for them. And this could only make this exposure to the similar situations that one almost died in is probably to blame, mostly for her dredged up feelings that would come up, and she would end up murdering these men, probably for not doing the same thing that the original rapist did, but only because the situation was similar, and she would never have been in this situation had she not been pressured to continue to be a hooker by Selby. Had Wuornos been apprehended after the first murder with help from the police officer or Selby, 6 more men might not have had to die. Who knows? She could have pled to self-defense in that very first murder. She could have gotten a lenient sentence and gotten treatment and therapy that she needed. We would never know, unfortunately. Had one of these people, multiple people, had she not been abused in childhood, had the cops apprehended her, looked into things, investigated, had Selby thought to herself, maybe if I actually love this person, I would help them. She needs help. Clearly, this is an individual that needed help. Now, what if there was no sexual violence in the life of Eileen Wuornos? A more stable childhood without being sexually abused, she would have had a lot better shake at life, in my opinion. Starting off this negative from such an early age gives you you're already born in a hole and you're digging yourself out the entire time, and that is very tragic. She's forced into prostitution at a very young age in order to survive, and this put her in that high-risk lifestyle. Had she not been a prostitute, she may not have come into contact with rape or sexual assault. Hopefully, that's the hope for most women and men, most people, that we won't, unless we are engaging in high-risk behaviors, we should not come into contact with these types of things. And her life would have been totally different had she not been exposed to sexual violence. Had there been no element of sexual violence in the film also, I wouldn't have gotten a sense of tragedy from a movie centering around a serial murderer. You feel almost bad, and I know that's probably what they're trying to portray in this movie, but I legitimately feel like this woman did not have a fair chance at life. And that is very tragic due to circumstances that were out of her hands from the age of 4 or 5. And that is the sense of tragedy in this movie that would not be there without the presence of sexual violence. Had there been no sexual violence, how would this affect Selby? She probably never would have met Eileen, because it was Eileen's unmet need for attention that put her into the world of lesbianism. She stated from the beginning that she was not a lesbian. She would not be. But after being suicidal and basically writing off men because what have they actually ever done for her, she decides to love a person for being a person regardless of gender. But had she not been sexually assaulted, had she not had all of this negative experience, she probably would not have engaged in a lesbian relationship. Therefore, due to sexual violence being a part of Eileen's life, that's what put her in the path to meeting Selby. Fun fact, Eileen's actual partner was named Tyria Moore, not Selby. The whole time that was being said in the movie, I was kind of thrown. Also, the big explanation point here is she would never have been dragged into a serial murder spree and had her entire life disheveled and had to be in the middle of this, almost probably being blamed as an accomplice herself, even though we seem to notice that she had nothing to do with the murders other than knowing that they occurred and not reporting them. Regardless, she would not have had to be in the middle of probably the most notorious female serial killer's murder spree that we've ever seen. All right. This has been my presentation on how sexual violence can create a serial killer as portrayed in the movie Monster. I had actually seen this film before this project, but I loved it, and I loved Eileen Wuornos' story, and it is very sad and very tragic that due to sexual violence from the beginning of her life and continued throughout, I don't think that she ever actually had a legitimate chance at normal life. And that's very sad, and that's something that faces a lot of people. We need more programs. We need more people coming forward to report this type of abuse so that they can get help, so that they don't become prostitutes and they don't become victims of high-risk crimes. They don't end up having to defend themselves and murder somebody and then possibly make their psychosis, their mental illness even worse, having a murder on their conscience. I love this movie, and I recommend it for anybody who wants a look into the life of a serial killer, especially one who was exposed to the amount of sexual violence that Eileen Wuornos was. Thank you, and that concludes the presentation.